All right, try that again. Welcome everyone to May's Rock Game Dev Workshop. So glad you could join us. In case this is your first time tuning into a Rock Game Dev Workshop, welcome. Rock Game Dev is an organization dedicated to fostering a community of game creators in Rochester, New York. Our mission is to provide a local platform for game creators at beginner, amateur, and professional levels to learn, share, and collaborate in all aspects of building games. If you want more info, head over to rockgamedev.com. You can get all the info you'll need over there. If you've got an idea for a workshop you'd like to give or a workshop you'd like to see, please let me know. You can find me at Sam_Camerata on Discord and Sam_Catamaran on Twitter. Which brings us to tonight's workshop, Business 101 for Indie Game Devs. Our speaker, Ashley Valdes Garcell, has been a business manager for small arts-based businesses for the past 5 years and has experience in guiding artists and creators through the process of making practical business decisions so they can quickly get back to doing what they love best, making awesome things. Tonight's talk will cover a basic overview of how to select a business structure, accounting methods, pricing and marketing, tackling taxes, and resources for further learning. All of the stuff that we all need to know. Feel free to drop any questions in chat as we go. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Sam. Hello, friends. I am Ashley Valdes Garcell, and as you saw, this is Business 101 for Indie Game Devs, a brief overview of everything you need to know, and tried to Google that one time, but it was too much information and you got overwhelmed, because we have all done that. Um, this is an incredibly broad topic. There's a lot to cover. I'm going to try to give you a very basic roadmap. So there should also be time for Q&A at the end if you have particular questions. But again, I want to emphasize basic roadmap. I've geared this presentation towards folks who have little to no business experience. So if I'm saying things that you already know, that is fantastic. I'm excited about it. If you don't know it, that's all good. You're here to learn. I really want to stick with the basics so that we're not leaving anyone behind. I've also made a core assumption in this presentation that you are operating on a shoestring budget or something close to it. Again, if you're not, that's fantastic because that opens up additional doors for you and what you can afford to do in establishing your business. But again, I don't want to leave anybody behind in this discussion. So I want to kind of start at our bases. My last point that I want to hit before we move on is that I'm not a lawyer, so that means I'm not your lawyer, and none of this constitutes legal advice, just recommendations and roadmaps. Again, for particulars about your business and how you're setting it up, you want to do your own investigating, talk to your own professionals. All of these things are important. We are just touching on the basics. So here we go. This is our initial roadmap. Um, there are a lot of moving parts, but they are not as overwhelming as you might think. It's basically all going to start with a ton of research. We're going to take these a step at a time, go through them, and figure out how they feed into one another. So we're going to open with the doing a ton of research and creating a business plan. These two things go together. You cannot have the business plan without the ton of research. And if you were hoping to get away with doing one without the other, I regret to inform you that it is simply not possible. Um, so let's talk about what a business plan is. It's a document that answers what are you doing and how are you doing it, which, as you might imagine, is pretty crucial for running your business. Lots of folks who are starting out with their business assume that they only need a business plan if they're trying to secure funding from an investor or from a granting agency. And you will definitely need one for that, but it is so much more than that. It represents all of the research that you've done into the viability of your business and how you have structured things and how you intend them to unfold. I really want to emphasize that it's also a living document that can and should shift over time to meet your changing needs as a business, because no business is completely static, or it shouldn't be if you want to grow it and have it be a thriving business. So you're going to need to revisit and shift things within your business plan. Again, I just want to emphasize that the core value of the business plan is its usefulness to you. I've likened it to other people like writing an essay that synthesizes all the information you know about a topic and then you have it in a little neat package with a bow. Um, when you're in difficult transitional phases in your business, you're not going to be scrambling and guessing about what your next direction is because you will have this plan that you wrote out for yourself. Um, and also, crucially, the process of research and writing the business plan tells you what you don't know, which is amazingly important. Um, Often, until you're getting into the nitty gritty of things and you're trying to come up with filling in the core components of the plan, you may not have realized that there were deficits in your knowledge. And now, awesome, we're going to dive into that and figure out how to fill in those blanks. Um, so, all business plans have several key components that we're going to be talking about. They can be called different names and different templates, but we'll start off by saying what's not a business plan. This is not a business plan. They will not give you shiny monies for this business plan. Not going to work out. All right, let's talk about actual components of a business plan. Um, so I've listed some really common headers for a business plan. There's about 1,000,001 templates on the internet, which means there's about 1,000,001 different ways to create a plan. And all of those are going to have different lists of essential components. I'm sure, after less than 30 seconds of digging, you'll find lots of argument about what are the most important parts. Um, but we talked earlier about what's the point of a business plan, right? It's a roadmap for you. So that lets us zero in on what are arguably the most crucial aspects, and we're going to fill in the blanks around those. Um, so, in the interest of time, because again, broad topic with lots to cover, I'm going to be focusing today on the components that I consider crucial. But I really encourage you to, look up templates online. You can shift and condense components that you find in ways that work for you. The only advice I would give you in that process is to not skip any component completely. Don't just say, oh, no, this doesn't apply to me. I'm going to leave it out. Um, I encourage you to figure out what its intended purpose is in that template and make sure it's addressed somewhere in your plan because there are aspects that have overlap. Um, as long as it's addressed somewhere, that's what you need to know. It's in there for a reason. And as you review those plan templates, you're going to eventually see a pattern where you've got similar concepts being called different things by different people, and that'll help you figure out, okay, well, these are the parts that I actually need to focus on. Um, and the uh, the breakdown of business plan into what I think are the arguably core components is this. So I combined and eliminated categories, and I have left the what I think are the four most important elements. Those are the executive summary, market analysis and strategy, personnel bios, and financial plan. Alternatively, you can think of these different elements as executive summary is what are you doing or making? Market analysis is how are you going to sell it? Management and personnel bios is who is going to make it? And your financial plan is how are you going to stay in business? Um, Everything else that I have grayed out here really serves those same core questions. So, for example, the operating plan feeds into the financial plan because those two elements you need to know right in your financial plan. What are your costs of operation? What are you doing in your business, and how does that affect your forecast for profit? A product development plan is also something that should be shifting with new launches. So you're going to find some of that in the market analysis and strategy part. Also for product development, and while this is crucial, it has been my experience working with creators that that's the part they need the least help with. They're always bursting at the seams with amazing ideas, and they're all about that part. So I figure I'm going to leave y'all to the creative part, and we're going to handle the drier topics here with as many memes as possible to just make it, much more palatable. So first off is the executive summary. Um, this is the first part of your business plan, but you should write it last because it is, exactly as stated, a summary, and it's hard to summarize what you haven't written yet. Um, it's a breakdown of everything else in your business plan as concisely as possible. Again, I want to emphasize concisely as possible. If you are submitting this business plan to a potential investor or granting agency and your audience has to wade through an unfocused executive summary, I guarantee they will not bother reading the rest of the plan. If the person who is wading through the unfocused executive summary is you, you're not going to be able to use your own business plan effectively. Also want to talk about, a great executive summary. is the perfect answer to, the what do you do question that you would answer with an elevator pitch. This is the process of creating an elevator pitch for yourself. And I feel like an important part of running your business is remembering that you never know who you're going to run into, or meet in your networks who's going to be a helpful addition to your support team, or somebody you can connect to who has skills that fill in the blanks that you don't. Um, so it always pays to know what you're talking about and be prepared and be able to explain somebody, oh yeah, this is what we're doing. This is the concept. Here's what we're working on now. This is how it all functions. Um, Again, the process of creation itself is so important for being able to answer those things. So business concept is very basic. What are you selling? One presumes it is indie games. But you may also be selling other things too. Who knows if you are also selling additional merchandise, which could be part of your marketing strategy. Um, and then to whom is it being sold and how? Again, that's the marketing part. So you've got target demographics, your who is your customer that you're trying to appeal to, how are you going to reach them. Competitive advantage is, how are you differentiated from your competitors. Obviously this is a heavily saturated market, and you need to know, what do you bring to the table that is different. What is different about your product, or how it's presented, or how it's experienced, and your current position. So by current position, I mean, what does the business look like at this point in time? And a little bit of where would you like it to be going? So that includes the management bios we're going to get into, is who is on this team and what do they do? Um, how often do you intend to be releasing products? Is this, you're going to come out with something once a year? Are you coming out with something every 6 months? Um, Try to avoid things that cause you crunch, because we all hate that. But some kind of schedule so that you can forecast your finances. And then previous successes of the business is just if you've had um, any other titles or successes in grant funding, awards, things like that. Because again, if you're going to hand this over to an investor, um, or a granting agency for a loan, you want them to see that you haven't just sat on your couch and been like, I've got a great idea for a game, even though I've never done anything like this before ever. So, there's something to back up what it is that you're trying to get done. And so finances tends to be the part, and again, we'll get into that section when we get to the financial plan. Finances tends to be the part that makes people nervous, but it is not that terrifying. So info on sales, profit, cash flow, and ROI. ROI is return on investment. Again, I'm assuming you're handing this over to an investor. They want to know, if they're giving you some amount of money, how much money can they expect to get back? You're not going to get anything for nothing. And if you have a good forecast, that is reassuring to whoever is going to be investing in you. Sales, profit, I feel like these are probably concepts that everybody is familiar with. Cash flow is just how much cash you have on hand and where it's coming from. But if there are questions about these particulars, we can definitely talk about the lingo at the end. Projected income and expenses for the next 1 to 3 years. Again, you're going to have a breakdown of, when you're looking at your marketing strategy and your product release schedule, that's going to inform some of what you're looking at in terms of, we expect to have this many sales. This is what the landscape looks like. We're going to approach it in these ways, and we expect to have this much money coming in, and then this much money going out, because we are paying people to work with us every 6 months to come up with a new game. Explanation of capital sources is just where is your money coming from for this? So that may be your personal funds. Again, maybe investments that you're, and that's what your business plan is written for. Um, could be loans, could be credit cards, which again is a personal source, but you're sort of fronting that. Not that I necessarily recommend that, but th- everybody's going to approach how they want to fund their business differently, and what's available to them may be different. Um, so if you're requesting funding, right, if that's part of the financial part of your executive summary because you're handing it over to a potential investor or granting agency, you really need to hit all of the points that are on there. How much do you need? How are you using it? And how much of your own money are you using? The last one is one that I feel like lots of folks don't realize is a really important element, because when you're requesting funding, whoever is giving funding to you wants to know that you have some level of skin in the game. So if it's, they're going to hand me this money and I am going to do all these things with it, but I'm not investing any of my own money in it, that's a bit of a red flag for anybody who's going to be looking at investing in you. So make sure that you hit all of those points. Um, Moving on to the next section, it's market analysis and strategy. Before I dive into this one, I wanted to plug that Carly did a great PR and marketing presentation in September 2019 that's in the Rock Game Dev YouTube archive if you're looking for more info on that particular area. Um, and the presentation does a great job delving into like the difference between PR and marketing. It's a really fantastic presentation. And again, it's a topic I can only touch on here. So, avail yourself of all of the awesome resources in front of you. But the market analysis and strategy section is broken up into these three parts: market analysis, competitive analysis, and specific actions. Um, so, market analysis is that ideal customer demographic. So, who is it that you're selling to? What is the, is do you have a vision in your head of your customer that you're assuming is this age or a particular gender, or do they live in a certain place? Are they married or unmarried? So these are the sorts of things that like a marketing company is going to go through if they were doing it for you. They would say all these elements like what are we, who is the person we're targeting? You basically make up a fake customer, and that's the person that you're gearing your marketing towards. Sometimes I think intended customer demographics can be somewhat limiting, and they make sense for some products more than others. I feel like for indie games, they can certainly be somewhat limiting, but it is helpful to not have such a broad customer demographic as people who play games, because that's it's maybe not, maybe a little bit too broad, and then you're not going to really be able to have a solid marketing strategy. When you start thinking about the age of your intended customer, or maybe like the frequency of their internet use, if you determine, oh, this is, my intended customer is somebody who would use social media regularly, or who would tune into watch streamers on Twitch, and so that would be a good marketing thing to try to get somebody to play my game, those sorts of examples. And then the follow up to that is, will the market support sales to that customer? So this is a really important element. um, does that person have money to buy your product? Will they buy your product? It's all well and good to, have your intended customer be like, I'm making my game for, 12-year-olds, but do they have the money to buy my game? Is a different question. Um, so you want to have this fairly set sense in your head of, this is the person that I'm marketing to, and will they be able to actually buy and play my game? Competitive analysis. So sometimes this is called a landscape analysis, but what does the competition look like? And this is really tough in a market that is as heavily saturated as indie games. It's there's so many different things to consider. Um, I've listed some of the thoughts there about when you're evaluating competition and looking at, studios that you would put yourself in the same bracket with. What's their pricing? How often are they putting a new product out? What's their marketing budget? Not that would be hard to determine without having it in, but you can make some assumptions based on like, oh, they only ever market in these ways. They probably are operating with less funds than that. Like if they're only ever doing social media things, that's a pretty minimal marketing budget as opposed to a big campaign with commercials that are showing up. That's a whole different marketing budget. Reputation is also a big deal too, because that affects things like pricing and product delivery. Obviously, a studio with an excellent reputation can afford to charge a lot more. These are all the things that you have to be considering. I recommend looking at least 5 competitors. That's going to give you a clearer picture of the landscape. Um, and you want to see how you can differentiate yourself from those competitors. So you don't want to jump in and say, I'm going to be exactly like this other company, because well, then you're not bringing whatever it is that is special about what you're bringing to the table to the table. Um, so the follow up to that is specific actions. Is what is your marketing strategy? How are you actually going to drive sales? Um, and the resulting expectations for your sales based on that. Uh, it's not enough to say, I am going to market my game for the month before it comes out. You want some pretty clear things around like, I'm going to be launching like a social media campaign. I'm going to be paying for ad space. I'm going to be, reaching out to journalists with the opportunity to do like a short brief on it, things of that nature. You want to have clear actionables, and you want those clear actionables to be proportional to your budget. I mean, I'm sure we would all love to have like a Raid Shadow Legends level of paying people for sponsorship, and like it would be in literally every YouTube video we watch. But most of us are not operating with that marketing budget, so let's stick to the things that are going to fit within what you can do right now. Personnel. Personnel is all about who is on your team. Um, and what are their qualifications? What can they do? And what have they done before? So you want to be able to have a listing of these are all of the people that are a core part of the company. And depending on if you're bringing on people for specific projects as contractors, you would have some info on them as well and what it is that they are bringing to the table. But these things are not usually a single person endeavor. So at the very least, it's common to hire a contractor to do a section that you may not feel comfortable with, like if you're a programmer but you want somebody else to do your music, very very common. So you'll be talking about that in this personnel section. So you could talk about what your background is, maybe in terms of work, in terms of education, um, the previous successes that you may have had in the industry. Again, awards that you have received. And awards can be for content or they can be like investment awards, like you've been awarded X amount of money to work on a thing. Um, who your connections are, that's a big one too. Like, what are your resources? So if you're somebody associated with another studio, or maybe you have access to like the studios at like RIT's Magic Studio, that would be a thing to consider in terms of like, oh, you're extra useful, not just because you have an awesome set of skills, but because you have access to particular resources. Um, and the last bit of that is just the structure of like, who is in charge? Um, Generally the buck has to stop with someone, and if you're working as say two co-founders, it might be a 50-50 split and you make all your decisions jointly, but that's also part of filling in that personnel section. um, then we've got the business plan, the financial plan, sorry. So the financial plan is just the viability of the rest of the business plan. And this is where a lot of the market analysis work that you did comes into play. Um, so you're trying to figure out, forecasting your sales based on how often you're releasing product, what you're going to be pricing it at, what your anticipated sales are, what they've been previously, where your capital is coming from. So that's a big one too. Can you afford to stay afloat? You've got to have a pretty clear operating budget. It is not a pleasant situation to decide that you're going to be working on a game and you're going to pay these uh, contractor colleagues to come in and do parts of it, and you need this certain equipment, and then whoops, all of a sudden, you're 4 months out and you're out of money. That is not a good place to be. So you need to buckle down to do the math on this and figure out if it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, you go back to the drawing board. There's so many things, so many elements that you can shift. You can shift pricing. You can look at different sources of capital. You can look at saving on personnel costs by doing more things yourself. Um, Shifting what your product development schedule is, maybe having more things coming out faster is better for your sales. Maybe having a project that is coming out slower because you can't necessarily afford to leave your day job to be able to focus entirely on it. I mean, there are so many different ways to be a game dev, you've got to choose the thing that makes the most sense for you, and you don't want to go bankrupt in the process. Um, Again, if you are handing over a business plan where the financial plan element does not add up, there is no granting agency or investor who is ever going to take a look at that and say, "Sure, take my money." Um, Again, there's so many moving parts to this, but you can sort of see as we've gone through all of them how they feed into each other. How having a clear picture in marketing helps you with the finances. How having a clear picture in personnel can help you with finances and marketing. And it's all important. Um, so bonus round. Bonus round discussion is on pricing because pricing is really complicated and weird. I would argue that it is more art than science. It is always good to go to the data. All of your decisions should be research based. So, know your landscape, know what pricing looks like. And I'm just going to touch on two important elements of pricing. And those important elements are perceived value and behavioral pricing. So, perceived value is commonly regarded as the way to price your product. So, you don't want to necessarily price things based on how much it costs to produce it. Um, when you're talking about perceived value, what does that mean? That's how many hours of gameplay is a customer going to get out of this product? Or are they going to get a really unique experience that might a unique experience that might merit a higher price tag? Um, there's there's the question of would you pay that price? Um, would your existing fans pay that price? And that's maybe a thing that you can ask them if you have that kind of network. Um, the other consideration, besides just what the perceived value of the game is the psychology of pricing or behavioral pricing. So this sort of plays out as like if every game on the market is $5 and yours is $10, there's this common worry that like you've priced yourself out of that market. But it's also worthwhile to consider that most customers go for mid-priced items. So your $10 product can also signal that it's a cut above those other $5 products, assuming, of course, that it can deliver on that implied promise. But that price tag also means that you can potentially run sales on your product to reach more people without necessarily destroying your bottom line, because this is the weird psychology of pricing. People are more willing to pay $5 for a $10 item than they are to pay $5 for a $5 item. So everybody is always looking for a deal. Um, there are entire books written just on the topic of pricing. So, I advise you to avail yourself of all the resources out there. There's so many schools of thought on this. Um, I'll add that, indie games in particular, just the trend has been this like in the past 5 years is a pricing race to the bottom, which I think hurts everyone. And it's not uncommon. I think that this is a thing that happens often in more creative industries, um, where there's this like race to the bottom on pricing. And the solution is not as simple as raise the prices, because then again you may price yourself out of that market. But I advise you to do your market research. You want to see what the landscape looks like at your price point. So, the barrier to entry in the field is really low in recent years. So the market is oversaturated. And if you're looking at, well, there's just lots of games out there at the 4.99 price point, so that's what I'm going to price at. Your game might get lost in those. And maybe it's not a 4.99 game. Maybe it's a 7.99 game because the other 4.99 ones don't have as much content, are not original in the same way that yours is, don't have particularly interesting mechanics. There's all kinds of things that go into that process. But just wanted to touch briefly on the concepts of perceived value and behavioral psychology of pricing, because those should definitely inform the choices you make in addition to the landscape analysis that you're going to do. Okay, let's check back in on our roadmap. How is our roadmap looking? We are on Clarify with co-founders, which is not necessarily going to apply to everyone. Um, we will touch on it briefly, but lots of folks are going to be working on starting a business just themselves. and maybe bringing on an occasional contractor. But some people would like to start their business with one or more co-founders. So let's just briefly talk about that. This is a long, wonderful list of just some of the things that you should talk about. Um, Whenever you are starting a business with other people, you need to create a partnership agreement. Partnership agreement answers so many questions, and it's not necessarily something that you have to file with any kind of government agency and doing the paperwork element of things. This is a document that exists for you, um, and it's just going to outline all of the rights and responsibilities for all of the parties involved, because there is nothing worse than diving into working with somebody and realizing that you had very different perceptions of how all of this were going to go. So having the document to refer back to also, especially things like how you're going to handle disputes, or what does the dissolution of the business look like if you run out of money, or if one of you wants out, what is the process for that? Having all of that set up in writing in advance will save you so many headaches. So just giving you a second to read through that and consider, there are, again, many, many more questions that you can ask. I mean, off the top of my head, I can think of about 20 more, but it's much more about sitting down, having the conversation with your co-founders about all the crucial elements, and making sure that you have them written down somewhere. All right. So now we are on to the forming a legal entity portion of this. So you figured out your business plan after doing a ton of research. If you have a co-founder, you sat down with them and figured out where you are going from here. And now, business structure time. Okay, so what are we considering in picking a business structure? There's three main elements. One is how profits are taxed. Two is the complexity and cost of setting it up, and if and the complexity and cost of continuing to administer it. And three would be liability protection. So any of the three structures that I have up right now, the sole proprietorship, partnership, or LLC, all of them will let you deduct business expenses on your taxes. You'll be able to have a business bank account. All of them are pass-through tax structures, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And these are really the differences between them. A sole proprietorship is for one person, a partnership is for two or more people, and an LLC could be either, because it's just a legal umbrella for one of the above. So if you have an LLC, you still have to determine if you're a sole proprietorship or a partnership. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these now. So, a sole proprietorship is very straightforward. You really just start doing stuff. You are going to owe taxes, both your income taxes. You'll have to do estimated income taxes, which if you've been self-employed, you understand the process of. If not, that's its own fun thing, where basically you hand over your uh, estimated taxes quarterly to the IRS, sort of pay them in advance. And you'll owe FICA, which is your share of Medicare and Social Security tax. Um, and I'm sorry, Medicaid and Social Security tax. I can never remember the difference between those two for the life of me. I'm gonna get off of this, and I'll have like checked which one was it, and I'll have gotten it wrong. So I'm just gonna say both. It is the social health care pay thingy is what FICA is all about. Um, so you're gonna owe that on all the profits of your business. The Another unfortunate thing is your personal assets are not protected. So if you get sued as a business owner, um, you could potentially have somebody come after your personal assets because there's really no division. Um, you're not going to need a separate business tax return, which is great. You'll just fill in some things on your regular Schedule 1040, and you can kind of pay yourself however you want. It's very loosey goosey, and that's both its pro and its con. A partnership, like I said, you just need to set up some kind of partnership agreement. Um, but there's a lot of in a partnership. You can figure out whatever you want about ownership and profit distribution. Again, you're going to owe income and FICA tax on all profits for this business. Again, your personal assets are not protected, except now there's more than one of you whose personal assets are not protected, which, depending on your risk tolerance or the risk tolerance of your co-founders, that might be incentive to set up an LLC. Um, the way that partners get paid are called guaranteed payments, not wages. which is important because it's like a salary as opposed to money for hours work. Um, that distinguishes it from an S corp, which we will briefly touch on later. You will have a separate tax return for this, and you'll again pay your share of personal income taxes using that tax return. So at the end of filing your partnership tax return, you'll get a form that says, this is your share of the business's profits and loss. And then you just integrate that into your regular taxes. I feel like putting the form number in there probably made it more terrifying somehow, but I assure you that it is not a complicated process. It's incredibly straightforward. And like I said earlier, all of these are pass-through taxation. So whatever money the business makes is the same thing as money you make. The good thing about that is, you don't have this artificial division um, where you're trying to set up a totally different system for your business. Like you're going to have your business accounts, but you don't necessarily need to have a like a business tax person who is handling just those things for you. It's really straightforward. Um, the potential downsides of these are again that you're not as protected as you would be with an LLC. So an LLC is kind of like an add-on to the other structures. Your assets can't be seized if you're sued. And you could shift to an S corporation status later if you wanted to. Um, but the downside of an LLC is that there's a lot more work involved to set it up. So you're going to have to follow all the steps that I've laid out there. Again, that can be really, it's a minimal investment in the scope of things that could be really useful for protecting your assets. But then you also have to have the question of like, what are the odds that our personal assets would be on the line? Like, it's in this industry, it's not necessarily terribly common that somebody would be suing you and going after your personal assets. But these are all decisions that you have to make for yourself. The bonus round for business structure is, what about S corps? Um, so I like S corps. I just do not like them in this particular field, and I do not like them for beginner business folks. Their greatest advantage is that the business profits that are not owner wages are not subject to FICA taxes. So that can be a huge money saver. But I think that the general requirements of running an S corp are too onerous if you are just starting off. I think the biggest onerous requirement is that running an S corp means that you have to pay your owners a quote reasonable wage according to the IRS, um, which you might find difficult to do if you are working on a game with minimal capital. So if you don't have a lot of capital built up from previous successes or a whole lot of successful rounds of funding from a venture group, you're gonna have a bad time. So you don't want to set up a system that you cannot follow through on because the IRS will not be happy about that. Um, all that said, there are pros and cons to each of these setups, and obviously there's the question of simplicity is an element too, especially when you're just starting off. And sole proprietorships and partnerships are about as simple as things get. They are not at all scary to set up. They're just a little bit of work. Um, you know, all that said, you can also investigate an S corp for yourself. Maybe that is something that you would like to look into. I'm here to throw out all the possibilities for you and let you figure it out. Okay, so figured out the forming a legal entity bit. What are the small details we're handling next? Permits and insurance and getting an EIN. Um, Permits and insurance, yay, so fun, woo! Uh, so you are, if you're setting up a sole proprietorship or a partnership, you are probably going to need a DBA. So it's a doing business as. It's used to register a fictitious name, and you can do so in Monroe County for a relatively cheap filing fee. It's like under $40, and you can have everything set up with your business name on it. This is, this is pretty much the go-to option for naming your business, unless your business name is going to be your legal name, which actually sounds kind of cool. And I'm not sure if anyone out there is really doing that in the game dev world. That would be interesting. But generally speaking, studio businesses have a fictitious name, so you'll have to file that. Um, LLCs have their own filing fees that you'll have to do annually. And then insurance. Again, this is not an industry that necessarily calls for insurance. I wouldn't immediately say, oh, yeah, you've got to have general liability insurance. Um, but there are reasons why you might want to. A good example would be like, general liability insurance can cover a lot of different things. One is the potential for like a copyright infringement suit. If you put something in a game and some other bigger company is like, hey, that looks a lot like our thing, and we're gonna set a copyright infringement suit against you, you may be able to pay some of the ensuing legal costs with that insurance policy. You you have to make that as a personal call. You want to weigh risks, assess if it makes sense for you. Um, I always advise getting a quote for a policy that might be of interest to you because it can be so different cost wise based on what it is you're trying to get and how much you're trying to cover. So it's would be impossible for me to say, well, a general liability policy for you is going to be $200 and it's going to cover the like. There's no way for me to tell you that. Um, just putting out that like that's a thing that you may want to look into and see if it makes sense for you. And when you get those sorts of quotes, talk about what are the scenarios that are covered. Getting an EIN is an employer identification number. So this is really easy. Get them online from the IRS. They're just giving them out. Uh, if you're a sole proprietor, this lets you not use your personal social security number, which can be really useful too when you're doing like signing off on a contract or something and you're having to put that in there. It's nice to have an alternate number. Um, and then your tax responsibilities, you're going to have sales tax. If you're selling through something like Steam, they will collect appropriate sales tax. If you're working with a distributor, they should also be assisting you with that. I just want you to have it in the back of your mind. The sales tax is something you have to pay. So if there isn't some kind of mechanism for how it's being handled, that's on you and make sure that it is being handled in some way. Um, it's a nice thing about putting things out with publishers is like often those things are handled for you. Again, we talked earlier about FICA taxes and income withholding. Look, I said here that it was Medicare. That's awesome. I probably have that right there. You still have to pay your FICA and your quarterly estimated tax withholding. Um, if you are bringing on contractors, and I know lots of folks do this, if you're saying, "Hey, I just want you to make the music for my game," or "I like need you to program this thing," anybody that you paid I want to like yell this from the rooftops because I realize lots of people don't know it. Anybody that you paid $600 or more to in the last calendar year needs a tax form called a 1099. You have to do this. And it requires you to have their social security number. So make sure you do this. If you take away nothing else at all, make sure you remember that one. Um, and again, we talked about how pass-through taxation works. So you're just going to file business taxes and then pay the resulting profit or loss on your personal income. Again, if you have like, if you end up spending a ton of money on, your game, let's say that you're paying several contractors, and then maybe you like have to buy software or a new laptop that you're going to be deducting on your as a business expense. You get all those things, and then maybe you don't actually launch the game that same calendar year, so it just looks like you have spent a ton of money with nothing coming in. Um, the nice thing about that is that your loss also gets applied to your personal income taxes. So, you can owe the IRS less because you spent more money in your business. So, when I talk about pass through taxation, that applies to profit and loss. It can be advantageous sometimes to pass on the loss to yourself. All right, now we're into the accounting parts. So you got your EIN, now you're ready to open a bank account and get on your accounting records. All right, opening a bank account. So this is really important. When it comes to personal finances and business finances, I always remember the wise words of the offspring, which is you got to keep them separated. Always. If you do not do that, in business circles, it's called piercing the corporate veil, which is a really weird phrase that makes me like vaguely uncomfortable, but that also reminds me why you should never do it because it's vaguely uncomfortable. Do not do the thing of mingling your personal and business finances. Just do not. Um, so your first thing is you're going to need to find a bank that has good terms for small businesses. You don't want them to charge you, you don't want them to charge you like arbitrary fees on things. I recommend locally. I recommend ESL. I tend to like credit unions in general, but I know that they have good banking for small businesses. You'll be able to get a debit card and some checks so that you can also, pay the folks that you are contracting with, if that is the case there. And if you have co-founders, make sure that they're there when you open the account because you want to all have signing privileges on that account and on the checks. And also you probably want to grab a coffee while you're in the lobby. That's just important. It's a core classic part of capitalism, and I encourage you to make good use of it. Um, so I just saw a question in the chat earlier talking about profit at loss passive about it being within an arbitrary year, like exactly now to exactly a year ago. Okay, so to answer a question that's in the chat about your tax profit and loss, that's going to be for the calendar year. So it's going to be like January 2020 to December 2020, the same way that you treat your when you're filing your taxes. So the tax year. Um, which is a really useful thing to consider when you're thinking about like maybe making a big purchase. And if you had an excellent sales year, let's say it's 2020 and everyone is stuck at home and they are all buying your game because it is a great hit and they can't go out and do anything else anyway, so they're like, yeah, let's just stay home and game, fantastic. um, and you rack up a ton of sales and it's absolutely incredible. If you were looking at also doing something like, oh, I really need a new computer and I need new software, you may want to buy those things in December 2020 because then when you do your taxes and you file your 2020 taxes in 2021, you'll be able to make your profit look smaller by having oh, about paying contractors. Okay, I thought we were just talking about how to like manipulate finances. um yeah, so the 1099 thing, yes, it is exactly the same thing, calendar year. So yeah, you have to issue a 1099. Anybody who got $600 within the same calendar year. If you're again, if you're trying to avoid that, that could be like if you're paying somebody in two parts, you could be like, I'm gonna give you this part in November, and you get this part in January, and now we don't have to do this noise. Um, but yeah, that's often like splitting a payment can kind of get you around those things if that's how your contract was set up anyway. um but yeah, thank you for the question. That was an excellent question. Usually when I'm talking about years, I'm talking about tax years because that's the only way I think anymore. uh, okay, so now we're going to move on to, you've got your bank account, you got everything set up, you had an initial deposit, you're super pumped, you've got that like new checkbook with the new checkbook smell. I'm not sure exactly I don't know if anybody even uses checks anymore. I certainly do. They're fantastic. Um, Now we're going to move on to the golden rule of accounting. Is keep good records. Um, there are a lot of different ways to keep your accounts in order. I feel like the simplest one is just some straight up good old fashioned cash based accounting, what's coming in, what's coming out. Um, Lots of people swear by QuickBooks and love it. And, it has like an internal thing for invoicing. If you are also working as a contractor for other people and you want to have like an easy invoicing system, that's awesome. Um, but there is nothing wrong with good old Google Sheets or Windows Excel. I mean, all of these are fantastic. They will do the trick. The thing that matters is that whatever you choose, you need to be consistent. Keep good records and keep them consistently. Just pick something that works for you and stick with it. Um, so you just want to make sure that you hold on to whatever is related to the business. You want to save your receipts, copies of your contracts. Um, Make sure that you are tracking, who you still owe for things, what you have coming in, um, and just some examples of like notes that you may want to make in your accounts. Obviously, the date that it came in, where it came from, or who it paid out to. If it's a partial payment and you're expecting more, like you want to be able to link those to, like, this was payment number one for this thing, this is payment number two for this thing. Um, who it was paid to if it was a contractor is particularly important, because again, you want to make sure that you didn't come to the end of the year and you have like, oh no, we racked up more than $600 and I never got this person's social security number and now I can't pass this on. Yeah, Sam, for real, the keeping track of receipts is so important. Um, I'm gonna plug that the most wonderful thing that I have ever done was get a scanning app for my phone, and every time I had a business receipt, I would just scan it immediately. And I would still like go put it in a file folder. I keep the physical copy, but I had a digital copy of every single receipt for every single thing, and I would always do it like the date that I got it. And then it was all organized in my phone. And backed up on my laptop, which is fantastic. So you want to make sure that you have everything as nicely organized as possible. Um, thank you for that's exactly what you do now is fantastic. Because I'm like, yes, good, all right. The system works. It's spreading to other people. Know what's up. It really will save you a huge headache. And yeah, you don't want an angry accountant if you are taking any of your business expenses to like a tax account that you're like, oh hey tax person, can you please set up all my stuff, and you just show up with like a shoebox of nightmare scraps of paper. They will be like, cool, I'm charging you as much as I possibly can and also never come back. You do not want that. So my bonus point in this is, if you're doing your own taxes, I mean, even if you're not, your accountant will be really happy with you if you do this. If you categorize your expenses by deductible tax category, that is how I have gone about doing all of my bookkeeping now, because come tax time, it makes life so much easier. You can look up what all the different categories are for tax deductible items, but some quick examples that are applicable to this industry: supplies, I mean, things like computers, software, if you have submission fees, things that you pay for marketing, payments that you make to contractors, all of these things are deductible, and you want them divvied up by category, because um, when you have to pay your taxes at the end of the year, there will be a section where you have to say like, "Oh, I spent this amount in this category," and it's just so much easier when you can be like, "Cool spreadsheet, sort by sort by deductible category, awesome, all laid out for me." Like, future you will thank past you so much. It's gonna be the best. All right. So now we are down to the home stretch of our roadmap. Um, so, working on your pitch and delivering your product are components that I don't feel as qualified to speak on. Um, these are things that the things that you've worked on previously in the roadmap are going to be incredibly helpful. My hope is that the business plan that you would have created at the beginning of the roadmap will really help you in clarifying things for your pitch. Having your financials in good order will make delivering your product as smooth as endeavor as possible. Um, but I feel like the Rock Game Dev community is going to be some of your best support in this arena. And I really want to leave it to much more experienced people than I am to guide you on those aspects. You have so many resources within your community that can coach you on those sorts of things. But I wanted to put them in the roadmap because they are an important part of the process, because they take us to the last step that I want to talk about, which is the review and revamp. So take it back now, y'all. One hop this time. What worked? Right? When you come to the end of your process, you have delivered your product, you've done a postmortem on it, and now is the time to stop and say, okay, what worked and what didn't? From a business aspect too, not just about the creative elements, but did our marketing plan go the way that we thought? What was the response to that strategy? Um, should we shift our development schedule because things did not go? I mean, I'm about to say this and I almost laughed at myself. Things didn't go the way that we thought it did. I don't know that anybody's product development schedule goes the way that you thought it did, but that's part of the process. Like, finding a more accurate reflection, by saying, well, this is how it went last time, that helps us inform how it will go next time. Do you need to adjust your sales forecast? Do you think that, you had a great turnout this time, you can expect more sales next time because you're getting more of a following, or people are more interested in your work, and you've got a greater base of potential customers. All of these things are a part of the process that you need to go through, and then you're going to go back to like the second tier of the roadmap to say, okay, we're starting a new thing, and this is going to be our strategy. You can adjust your business plan. It is not set in stone unless you have chiseled it in stone, in which case I'm incredibly impressed with you. How did you do that? That was kind of weird. um, it is a living document. Feel free to adjust it. There's so many moving parts and shifts. The industry shifts, you shift as a business owner. You need to keep up with those things, and the keeping up with those things comes down to the review and revamp. So then, couple closing thoughts. Do not be intimidated. I give you a ton of information in a very short span of time. um, but you can do this. It is not scary. Like, you can figure it out. I believe in you. Make really good use of your networks. Having a community like Rock Game Dev is amazing in that it gives you built-in resources in terms of asking advice of other people, collaborating with other people, um, and strive to pay it forward by also being a resource to other people. Those sorts of communities are absolutely invaluable professionally and personally. Um, Knowing when to pay a professional is also really helpful. Like the future accountant that will probably thank you because your receipts are not in a shoebox. If it will take you 12 hours to do your own taxes, but you could pay someone else to do it in 2 hours, maybe that's a good use of your money. And knowing when to do that is a good call. Um, and I like the same place that we started off in. The process of writing your business plan is going to be a tremendous help to you. And if you do nothing else, do that. Write your business plan, even if it is like a poor first draft and you need to go back and research a bunch of parts and you like left sections open because you're nervous about them. That's cool. Get something down. And once you have something down, revisit it and try to add more to it, expand upon it, research further, make it a thing that you are working on constantly, till you have it in a good place. Because until you have a business plan in place, you do not have a business, no matter what else you have done. And that's what I have to say. So I am open to questions, comments, concerns. I'm for it.
Okay. I do have a quick question as we kind of wait for folks to trickle in with their own questions. And
Absolutely.
what is, in your experience, do you have any brands that you recommend or recommend against for insurance? We as a company have done a little bit of research, but haven't come out with any definitive kind of folks that we like or didn't like.
So I don't have a particular company that I would recommend or a brand that I would recommend. If you if you have employees and you're looking specifically for workers' comp, one of the best things that you can do is go straight to New York State because they have obligatory workers' comp for W-2 employees, and they will usually give you the best price. So that's useful to know. But it has been my experience that so many companies vary drastically between like, okay, cool, we're covering this and here's the quote for it, but like maybe the service and response isn't great and I'm not ecstatic about it. I've done personally for businesses that I've had. I've done general liability insurance with State Farm, and they were pretty solid. But I wouldn't necessarily say that their pricing was the most fantastic. And those are difficult considerations, like what is the I guess it boils down to like how much do you think you're going to need to use that insurance, or have a what's the value of the like customer service element to you. And that was one where I felt like I was willing to pay a little bit more because I felt like the response was excellent. um but it really varies on like what you are trying to obtain the insurance for. Like, is it general liability, is it workers comp, is it like product insurance? So tough answer. I'm
Awesome.
sorry. I wish I could give a
Oh,
better
that's
one.
great. Thank you. And I do have to ask, uh,
Hmm.
if someone, hypothetically, definitely not me or any of my peers, if we have a business already and
Hmm.
are finding that, like, oh, there's something in this presentation that we missed in our formation or did wrong, like,
Hmm.
um, is there any special considerations in terms of going back and fixing it other than like do it as soon as you can?
That's a really great question. Um, I mean, do it as soon as you can is definitely definitely a guiding principle here. Um, I think it depends upon what the error is, because you may have something like if you filed a if you like filed a DBA, but now you shifted to, like, your EIN is for your sole proprietorship, but you didn't get an EIN for the business that you were doing business as. Like, that one is annoying, but you can rectify it pretty quickly. Um, it's more a matter of, like, yeah, running to fix it as soon as possible is a great go-to. Um, if you have made if any hypothetical person has made any kind of error of a tax-based nature, then maybe they didn't do the things they were supposed to do in that regard. Um, I recommend doing it right from here on out and laying very low. Don't don't try to necessarily fix that one. It might be more of a headache. It's not uncommon for lots of entrepreneurs to get into what they are doing and realize that maybe they didn't file taxes correctly, or they didn't deduct things correctly, and they just the advice is always going forward, just do it right. um Structure wise, same thing, going forward, do it right, rectify it as quickly as you can. And that's okay. Odds are very, very good that it's not going to be an issue in the long term, and you are absolutely not the first person to make this mistake. Like, no one is, in the wonderful world of business. Everybody has made the same set of mistakes a million times.
Fortunately, so far as I know, knock on wood, our error was not tax based, but I think that's great. We actually we found our error recently, and it is already rectified. But
Good. That's
I
excellent.
know that there was a little bit of like a, oh no, we were supposed to have this thing, and like, yeah, I guess it's good to put it out there that sorry, that happens and it's okay, and just fix it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is, this is a learning process. I mean, and I feel like if somebody told me that they started their first business and got everything absolutely right off the bat, would feel like they're probably lying. Like, it really, we're all human and we make mistakes. And so glad that you were able to find yours and say, "Oh, wait a minute, we can rectify this." Um because it's much more insidious when it's been 10 years and you realize, oops, there was something we didn't fix way back then.
Yeah,
um and again, that's part of the review and revamp, right? Like, you want to go over your things and say, wait a minute, are we doing everything to the best of our ability and properly? um because you get new information, you learn new things from people. You might, in conversation with somebody else, they say, "Oh yeah, I set up the widget," and you're like, "I didn't know we were supposed to have the widget." And they're like, "Oh yeah, everybody, it's a legal requirement to have the widget." You're like, "Oh gosh, all right, cool, what are we doing?"
yeah. I think anyone super familiar with Ayla's kind of story and background will know that we have owned the fact that we've made a number of mistakes in our 3 years or so as a business. And so I'm very happy to see something like your presentation kind of coming through, giving us the pointers that I wish we'd had 3 years ago.
I am better late than never, right? But
For sure.
I really like the adage about the faster you make mistakes in trying something new, the faster you are learning. So
Yes.
I see another question in the chat. What point should we start doing this stuff? Is it when money gets involved? Um, that's a good question. I think that I think that if you could do it before money gets involved, that's even better. Particularly the setting up a business plan, knowing what direction you're headed in. Um, because if you are, if there's money getting involved in the sense of, like, you've already released something and you're getting paid. Let's say maybe you released on Steam and you're getting money coming in, but you set up your Steam account with your personal information. Now you're like, oh wait, I wanted to form a business and have an EIN, and I didn't set it up that way, and I don't have a DBA because I just kind of jumped into the thing. Now you have to go through the process of fixing that. And so, I feel like you save yourself headaches down the line if you put these things in place as early as you possibly can. Um, many people, and there's nothing wrong with if there's money already involved, like that's cool. Just start as soon as you can on the process. But I think lots of folks don't realize that they should be working on something like a business plan and separating their finances. That's one that really gets me because the business plan is a core component of then setting up all your other things about, okay, I'm setting up this business structure so I can get my taxpayer number from the IRS, I can get my EIN, and I can set up my bank account, and I can keep my business and my personal account separate. Um, all of those elements are crucial. By the time you're getting paid into your personal accounts, you already are not distinguishing between, you're doing that piercing the corporate veil. Again, it's the creepiest phrase. It just sticks in my head and I can't let it go. You're already doing that mingling. So the faster you can unmingle, the better.
We'll give another minute or two for questions, but as we kind of wait for that, is there anywhere that you want to plug people to find you, find work of yours, any resources you want to plug, anything like that?
So in terms of resources, I always really highly recommend the the government website for the Small Business Administration, so it's just sba.gov, is such a tremendous learning resource, and it has seemingly impenetrable language. It's just it's so dry and dense. But it is incomparable as a resource. It has almost everything you will ever need to know. So when you're feeling up for perusing that, that is awesome, and you should definitely take a look at. Um, I feel like in the internet age, there are just so many resources. I mean, I can't even like recommend a book anymore because there's so many books on the topic that are excellent, and so I feel like I would kind of be scrambling to do so. Um, but there's there's uh there's so much out there. I mean, I always recommend starting with like what is the topic in particular that you are trying to learn about. And I think going from there to be like, what are your best resources? Absolutely, SBA.gov should be like at the top of your list for everything all the time because it is a great authority on the topic, particularly when it comes to like taxation and business structure things, because they're the people running stuff, so their word is law, quite literally. Um, but delving into topics individually would be my advice in terms of finding further resources. And so for plugging my work, I am I am full up on clients at the moment, but I will be available to ask questions of in the community. Like if things come up, I would also be open to doing another one of these kind of more in depth, a business 102, if you will, if we if the community would like to learn more about particular topics. Um, so I will plug myself as a community resource available to be reached out to. Um, I don't have a social media presence because I am incredibly boring. So, but you can always rewatch this amazing presentation and remember the incredible memories we have made here together this evening because they were top notch and very businessy.
They absolutely have been. And yeah, that'll be live on the YouTube archive. I think it's just Rock Game Dev on YouTube, right? Awesome. Doesn't seem like there's any more questions, so I think we're just about done. Thank you so much again, Ashley, for the wonderful talk, which I'm sure I will be referencing into the future.
Thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciate you having me.
Awesome, and thank you everyone who tuned in. See you next month.